Welcome back to Echoes of Egypt. Today we're going to speak about one of the most common symbols in ancient Egypt, the Ankh, or the key of life. We will explore its meaning and its significance in ancient Egypt, how early Christians in Egypt adopted it, and how other cultures also adopted it. So let's get started. The Ankh is a hieroglyphic symbol that represents the word life, and by extension, it's also used as a symbol of life. It has a T-shape topped with an oval-like shape. The symbol often appeared in Egyptian art as representing life or life-giving. The earliest examples of the Ankh dates back to the first dynasty, nearly in the 30th century BC. In ancient Egyptian belief, life was a force that circulated throughout the world. Individual living things, including humans, were manifestations of this force. And sustaining life was thus the central function of the deities, who governed these natural forces. Therefore, the Ankh, which represented life, was frequently depicted being held in the gods' hands, representing their life-giving power. The gods were often depicted in tombs, giving the Ankh to the pharaoh, as giving him the source of eternal life. Moreover, the pharaoh to some extent represented Egypt as a whole. So by giving the sign to him, the gods granted life to the entire nation. By extension to the concept of life, the Ankh could signify air or water. That's why in some artworks we can see gods held the Ankh up to the nose of the king, offering him the breath of life. We can actually see this scene everywhere in ancient Egypt. Here we can see the god Horus giving Ramses II the Ankh as eternal life. And here actually we can see the goddess Isis resurrecting Osiris by giving him life, or the Ankh. And here we can see the god Amun making the gift of life to the pharaoh Thutmose IV. More than that, the Ankh was used for decorations more than any other hieroglyphic signs. Mirrors, mirror cases, and floral pockets were usually made in its shape. There is a big debate among scholars on what the sign actually represents. Let's explore some of these different possibilities. The first possibility is that the Ankh is actually a knot formed of flexible material as cloth, as some early versions of the sign show the lower part as two separate flexible materials, similar to the ends of a knot. This is similar to the Tiyet symbol, or the knot of Isis, which is a symbol that represents the concept of protection. That's why Egyptologists Henry Schaffer and Henry Fisher thought that the two signs had a common origin. That's why they regarded the Ankh as an amulet, which is a spiritual object used for protection or good luck, and not for practical reasons. Another possibility is that the Ankh had a sexual meaning. For instance, Thomas Inman, who is an amateur mythologist in the 19th century, thought that the sign represented the male and female reproductive organs joined together into one single sign. And this idea appeals to many people, as you can see the connection between the male and female organs as the source of life and the meaning of the symbol, which is life. Victor Loret, a 19th century Egyptologist, argued that mirror was the sign's original meaning, so this sign is simply a mirror. A problem with this argument, which Loret actually acknowledged, is that deities are frequently shown holding the Ankh by its loop, and their hands actually pass through where the solid reflecting surface of the Ankh-shaped mirror would be. Thus, most probably it doesn't represent a mirror. So there are actually more theories, but those were kind of the main ones, and at the end, till now, nobody knows for sure what the sign actually represents. Now let's try to answer this question. Is there a relationship between the Ankh and the cross? There's some truth to that, but in a very specific sense, away from all conspiracy theories. Check this out. This is a page from a New Testament manuscript that dates back to the 4th or 5th century CE. It's written in Coptic, the latest development of the ancient Egyptian language. You can see a big cross that looks very similar to the Ankh. This is called the crux ansata, or a handled cross. Coptic Christians in Egypt have used this variation of the cross for centuries, and most probably it's inspired by the Ankh. The earliest known example of a crux ansata comes from a copy of the Gospel of Judas from the 3rd or 4th century CE. Check also this piece of cloth, dating back to the 4th century CE, showing Christians were using this variation of the cross extensively for decorations. Adapting the Ankh to Christianity is not simply a case of plagiarism. it demonstrates how early Christians were deeply embedded in their cultures, in many cases adapting Christianity to their own indigenous cultures. This is exactly the case in Egypt. Despite the early Copts being Christians, they were still very close to their indigenous tradition, using it in daily life and adapting artwork, including the Ankh. Historians also mention this adoption. Socrates of Constantinople, a 5th century Christian historian, wrote that Christians and polytheists were arguing over who owns the symbol of the Ankh. This happened when Christians were dismantling Alexandria's great temple, the Serapeum, at the end of the 4th century. They noticed cross-like signs inscribed on the stone blocks. Polytheists who were present said that the sign actually meant the life to come, an indication that the sign referred to was actually the Ankh. However, Christians claimed that the sign was their own, indicating that they could easily regard the Ankh as a crux ansata. Now let's see how the Ankh was adopted in other cultures. The people of Syria and Canaan adopted many Egyptian stuff during the Middle Bronze Age, including hieroglyphs, of which the Ankh was by far the most common. Look at this cylinder seal showing gods and goddesses of old Syria, along with the Ankh symbol. This dates back to the 17th century. And here, that's a clear adoption of the symbol and its meaning. In 2010, a clay seal dating back to the 7th century BC, belonging to King Hezekiah of Judah, was discovered in Jerusalem, which featured ankhs on the sides of a winged feature, clearly showing influence by Egyptian culture. Another example which is very obvious is the artwork in the Kushites kingdom, which was in the south of Egypt and had a great connection to ancient Egypt, and was also heavily influenced by its religion. We can see the Ankh appearing in temples and in tombs, in general in many of the same contexts as in Egypt. So far we have seen influence in Syria, the Near East, and the Kushites or Sudan today. There are also many other cultures, including the ones in Crete and in Cyprus, that was heavily influenced by Egypt. But in general, you get the point. So by the end of this episode, you now should know the significance and the importance of the Ankh symbol and what it actually represents, which is basically life. Now if you visit Egypt and see the symbol in the walls of the temples, you get the idea. If you visit the old Cairo district with the old churches and saw the crux ansata, you now know how it actually originated. So I end by thanking you for watching, and if you enjoyed the episode, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more episodes. Bye.